Hello and welcome to lesson number 2 of All About Stamping. Today I'll be showing you different types of ink that exist out there, why I use certain ones, as well as some of the common coloring utensils that I use for coloring my stamped images. So first I'm going to start out with different types of ink, why I would use one over the other. Well, we have dye ink, and the other basic one is pigment ink. Now everything else is kind of either a mixture of two or is just slightly different than one. So distress ink is a lot like regular dye ink, but it stays wet longer so you can blend it. So let's just go ahead and stamp. I have this Jenny Bolin for Ranger Spice Tin ink, and all of these are, you can see it's a felt pad, so it's really flat. You get a really good impression and inking out of your stamp. And these dry really fast. All dye inks do. This is a very good standard dye ink, and I really like the clean and crisp impression that you get with it. So I'm using this stamp from Hero Arts just to show you the differences between each one and how they stamp. So I have my dye ink, and this pad could probably use a little bit of re-inking, but I still need to order the re-inker, so just bear with me here. But you can see it provides really clean, crisp edges on both kinds of cardstock. And you get that really solid, thick image, but you can still see the paper color through a little bit. And that is dye ink. It dries quickly, and this one is water-based, which means if you mix it with water, it'll turn into kind of like a watercolor or paint. You also have Memento ink, which is the same exact kind. It's a dye ink, water-based, so if you mix it with water, it will smear. So that's why it's so good for coloring with Copics, because Copics are based on alcohol. If you were to color this with, say, a Crayola marker, it would smear, but since this has alcohol in its base, when they mix, they don't blur each other. So that brings me to my next point, which is another kind of dye ink, StazOn, or solvent-based ink pads, another word for alcohol. So you can color with Crayola markers with these, since it'd be mixing water with alcohol, but you cannot use StazOn with Copic markers. So you're probably wondering, why would you use StazOn? Well, it's great for really slick surfaces because it dries so fast. So if you're wanting to stamp on transparency or anything like that, StazOn is definitely the ink you want to use. If you use dye ink or really any other type of ink, it won't dry on a very slick surface. And this is also a dye ink. I just wanted to show you. This is a Stampin' Up! Dye ink pad. And if you buy ink from them, it's most likely this kind, because their craft ink is actually a pigment ink, and you have to fill the ink pad yourself in order to get that, otherwise get the little spot things. So this classic ink pad from Stampin' Up!, same qualities as the one I just showed you. It's a felt pad, so it's very smooth and it gets a very good impression. So this one you can also use with Copic markers because it's water-based. You can also use it with a blender pen to make kind of watercolored images. So I'm going to clean my stamp off here. And you can see I just sprayed it with water, and now I'm going to wipe it with my rag. It doesn't really matter to me if anything is left on it, but you can see this is pretty clean. And then what we're going to do is bring out the Distress ink. Now Distress ink is also a dye ink, so it's very similar to the Jenny Bolin ink or any other dye ink that's out there, but the difference is that it has special properties in it that help it stay wet longer, so it's easier to blend. Also, it tends to kind of bead up on the stamp a little bit, and that's just part of the distress quality. I think it goes pretty well with the nature of the ink, but don't be expecting to get a perfectly stamped image with this. You can see with this, even with this darker color, it's a little bit blotchy, which goes really well along with the distress theme, but isn't exactly like every other dye ink out there. and here is it on the craft. So you can see this also lets the cardstock color show through a little bit. Next we have pigment ink. And pigment ink is really interesting because it's kind of like oil-based ink. It's kind of like you can't get it off your fingers very easily, which is great because it's really, really opaque, gives you great color, but it takes a really, really long time to dry, which is why I have a couple of these small ink pads, but I don't have any big ones because they're not very usable for me. A lot of people really like the colors that you get with the pigment ink, but I'm very impatient, so I don't use them very often. The next best thing to pigment ink is chalk ink, which is basically that thickness, that opaqueness of the pigment ink, but it dries a little bit quicker. So this is water-based. It actually blends with water with blending pens. You can color with it. It just takes a little bit longer to dry. But as you'll be able to see here, it goes on fairly opaque. So you see, it's almost the same color on both of the cardstocks. Versus on this one, it seems like the dye inks get a little bit darker on the darker cardstock because the ink shows through. Or because the cardstock shows through. So that's my little demonstration of different types of inks. Basically, for most stamping techniques, unless you're going for a certain look or have a certain color, you can use chalk ink for sentiments, things like that. But if you're going to be coloring, you want something that'll dry quickly. So I usually use Memento black ink, or just a regular dye ink works great too. These are both regular dye inks. If you want to use distress ink, that's great. Maybe just heat it with a heat tool before, or let it sit aside for a few minutes before you get into some intense coloring. Next, I wanted to talk to you about the two methods that I use the most for coloring my stamped images. Besides using pattern papers and cutting them out and piecing them together, which is called paper piecing, I use two types of coloring techniques, I guess you could say, to color my images. My first are Copics, which you can see here. I have a few of, not nearly the entire collection, but a few of each color, enough to give me enough variation that I can use these quite often. And these are pretty expensive for an art supply. They're about $5 a marker, but the tips are replaceable and they're very sturdy, and you can always buy refill inks for them. So these markers will last you literally forever with very little upkeep. It's just the initial cost that does cost a lot. And I have Copic coloring videos, which I'll put on the screen here, that you can click on, and I'll be using these in the series as well. So I won't go over exactly how to blend them and things like that now. But one thing that I can tell you right now is that when you buy colors, you should buy 3 that are in the same color family that are within a couple numbers of each other. So I have RV04, RV06, and RV09, and these all blend really well together. And you can kind of just look and tell. We have the RV06, the RV08, or this was RV04, RV06, and this is the RV09. So I collected those Copic markers over the past few months and will continue to grow my collection, and will show you more about them in the upcoming series. Next, I wanted to talk about my Prismacolor pencils. I bought these, the 48 count, about 3 years ago, and they've been serving me very well. I apologize, this part of the video cut out, so I had to do a little voiceover, but really, they're a really great set. I'm hoping to save up for the 96 color set sometime, but the 48 set works very well for me. I've had to pick up a couple of browns individually, but other than that, it gives me a great scope of colors, and I'll put some links on the video screen right now that link to my past coloring videos with colored pencil, and of course I will be sharing some more over the course of this video series. You can pick these up at your local art store with a coupon, or online, definitely at Simon Says Stamp and a lot of other online retail stores. And they're just really fun, easy to use. You can start out with Crayola pencils and really work your way up, or you can just get a 12 count set of these and see how you like them, see how the color quality works for you. I really like my Prismacolors because they're definitely some concentrated color, and you can tell the difference in quality between that and Crayola. But like I said, Crayola is a great way to start out with, even just using what you have on hand. So you'll definitely be seeing more of these colored pencils in the upcoming videos. So I hope this has given you a good overview of different types of inks and different types of coloring utensils. I'll be back next time with the start of my different company series. So I'm going to be covering one company per video, and I'll tell you what I like about them, what kind of style they go for typically, and hopefully you'll get some really cool ideas. I'll be creating a card per video, so you'll get to watch that. And I hope you stay tuned for my next video. So thank you very much for watching All About Stamping, and I will catch you again next time.